You've handed us a really fascinating stack of research today. And I have to say, if you are a learner who, just loves untangling a massive complex mystery, you are in the exact right place.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really deep one today.
Yeah, because imagine looking at the exact same ancient texts as millions of other people, but concluding that the main character is an entirely different species.
Right.
That's essentially what we're looking at. Think of it like a massive ancient contract review. We're looking at how two different parties read the exact same clauses, the exact same definitions, and walk away with wildly different realities.
It really is the ultimate interpreted puzzle.
Yeah.
I mean, you think you're standing on solid, shared ground, and suddenly a single word fundamentally changes the universe you're reading about.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a really detailed textual analysis. It's from a YouTube video transcript we sent our way.
Yeah, from a channel called Help for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. And the source material directly compares the teachings of the Watchtower Society, which is the organization that publishes Jehovah's Witness materials, against traditional biblical texts. And the whole video is tackling one massive central question. Is Jesus Christ actually the Archangel Michael?
Right, which is a huge question.
Yeah.
And before we jump into the mechanics of this text, I do want to establish our ground rules for the day.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, because we are not here to take theological sides or, declare who is definitively right and who is wrong in the grand scheme of religion. Our job is just to act as your analytical guides.
Impartial guide.
Exactly. We are going to impartially lay out the Watchtower's arguments exactly as they are presented in your source material. And then we will examine the specific textual counter-arguments that the video provides. We're just looking at how these arguments are constructed piece by piece.
Okay, so let's start with the construction of the Watchtower's case. Because, if you're just skimming the text of the Bible, the idea that Jesus and the Archangel Michael are the exact same entity, it doesn't seem like an obvious leap.
No, it doesn't.
Right. There's no verse that just plainly says Jesus is Michael. So how does the Watchtower arrive at that foundational conclusion?
Well, it comes down to a very specific logical deduction, which the source outlines by quoting a Watchtower publication called What Does the Bible Really Teach?
Okay.
The argument starts with the etymology of the word archangel itself. The prefix arch in Greek means chief or principal.
Right.
So an archangel is, by definition, a chief angel. The Watchtower looks at that and concludes that because the word means chief, there can logically only be one.
Ah, I see.
Right? You don't have multiple supreme commanders. There is one chief at the top of the pyramid.
I follow the linguistic logic there. One chief, therefore one singular archangel. But how do they cross the bridge from there is only one archangel to that archangel is Jesus?
That bridge relies really heavily on their interpretation of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16.
Okay, what does that say?
The text describes the resurrected Lord descending from heaven, and it specifically says he comes with an archangel's voice.
With an archangel's voice.
Yeah, and the Watchtower looks at that phrasing and makes a definitive equation. If Jesus is shouting with an archangel's voice, he must be the archangel. Who else would have that specific voice?
Wait, let's unpack this voice argument for a second.
Sure.
Because grammar just doesn't always work like a mathematical equal sign,
Right.
Like if I say a CEO walks into a room with the booming voice of a drill sergeant, that doesn't literally mean the CEO is a drill sergeant, right?
Exactly.
It's a description of the sound or the authority of the shout. It's not a literal statement of his identity.
And that is precisely the counter-argument the source brings up. The video presenter points out that saying someone comes with the voice of an archangel doesn't necessitate that they are one in nature.
Yeah, it could just mean he comes with majestic, loud authority.
Right. Or, as the source notes when looking at the broader context of other translations, it could describe a sequence of accompanying events.
Oh, like an entourage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Lord descends, an archangel shouts, a trumpet sounds. It's an entourage of sound. But for the Watchtower, that voice is a definitive, literal identifier.
Wow. Okay.
And once they establish that baseline, they take it even further into some incredibly vivid imagery in the book of Revelation.
Right, and this is where the source brought up some claims that completely caught me off guard. Wait, going from archangel's voice to identifying Jesus as the angel of the abyss who destroys Christendom.
Yeah, it's quite the leap.
How does this video explain that massive leap in characterization?
Well, it makes sense if you understand how the Watchtower maps out biblical prophecy, which a source touches on. The video references a Watchtower book on Revelation, which claims Jesus is indeed the angel of the abyss mentioned in Revelation 9:11.
Which is wild.
In Hebrew, this angel's name is Abaddon, and in Greek, it's Apollyon, which literally translates to destroyer.
Which is a pretty intense title for Jesus.
Extremely intense. But the Watchtower teaches that this angel brings a tormenting woe upon Christendom, which they view as apostate or false religion.
I see.
Because they view Jesus as the ultimate executioner of God's judgments, they map the identity of Abaddon onto him. And the source points out another major leap regarding the year 1914.
Right, 1914.
The Watchtower points to a strong angel in Revelation 18, and they interpret this figure as Jesus beginning his heavenly rule as co-king and judge in that specific year.
But wait, why 1914? The video mentions it, but what's the mechanism behind that specific date?
According to the source's analysis of Watchtower theology, 1914 is the mathematically calculated date based on prophecies in the book of Daniel, when the Watchtower believes Jesus' invisible presence and heavenly kingdom reign began.
Oh, so it's a very specific anchor point for them.
Exactly. Because that year is the anchor of their prophetic timeline. Any strong angel doing major kingdom-shifting work in the book of Revelation around that narrative timeline gets retroactively identified as Jesus in his angelic form.
So it's a very cohesive, locked-in narrative. I mean, if you accept the initial premise.
Right, you accept the premise.
Every unnamed angelic hero, or even the destroyer angel, gets consolidated into one single character. Michael the Archangel, who is Jesus. But if the Watchtower relies entirely on the premise that chief means a singular, exclusive entity, what happens when the source looks at the original languages and finds a plural?
Well, the entire foundation starts to shake.
Yeah.
And this is where the video presenter takes us back to the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 10, verse 13.
Okay.
This is a fascinating glimpse into ancient cosmic hierarchies. In this verse, an angel is speaking to the prophet Daniel, and he mentions Michael. But he doesn't call Michael the singular chief.
Oh.
According to the original Hebrew text, he calls Michael one of the foremost princes.
Wow, that is a massive distinction.
Exactly. One of. It is explicitly plural. The source highlights that this angel in Daniel was engaged in a spiritual battle against a demon prince over the kingdom of Persia. And Michael, as one of the foremost princes, came to help him.
Right, so we aren't just talking about a title here. In the ancient world, these princes were viewed as literal territorial managers of the cosmos, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a job description. So if Michael is one of the foremost princes, that implies there is a whole board of directors at his level.
That's a great way to conceptualize it.
It's a huge demotion from being the singular, supreme creator of the universe. He's essentially a regional manager in a heavenly hierarchy.
It directly challenges the Watchtower's foundational premise that archangel inherently means there is only one. If there's a plurality of princes, there are clearly others at his rank.
Hold on, I'm stuck on something else from my notes regarding this hierarchy.
What's that?
The video mentions an argument the Watchtower makes about there not being two heavenly armies. The logic is that it makes no sense to have one army commanded by Michael and another army commanded by Jesus.
Right.
Therefore, they must be the same person. But why do they insist on that? Couldn't they just be two different generals serving under the same king?
That is exactly the logical flaw the video points out. The source addresses the Watchtower's claim by pointing to Matthew 13:41, where it says, "The Son of Man will send his angels."
Okay.
But elsewhere, the biblical text says all angels belong to God the Father. The video's resolution to this perceived conflict is simply the chain of command we just discussed.
The regional manager thing.
Yes. If Michael is a prince, a regional manager, to use your term, he naturally commands subordinate angels. But the entire heavenly host, including Michael and his specific subordinates, ultimately belongs to the supreme commander, the Father and the Son.
So it's not two competing armies.
No, it's a unified military structure.
Okay, so we have the plurality of princes in the Hebrew text. We have the chain of command resolving the two armies issue. But the source brings up an even bigger textual conflict, and it has to do with the mechanics of worship.
Yes, this is perhaps the most critical textual paradox the source explores. And it revolves around a specific Greek word, proskuneo.
Proskuneo.
Yeah. In Hebrews 1:6, referring to the Son, the text commands, "Let all God's angels worship him." In almost all traditional translations, proskuneo is translated as worship.
Right.
But the source notes that the New World Translation, which is the Bible translation published by the Watchtower Society, chooses to translate that exact same Greek word as do obeisance when it applies to Jesus.
Do obeisance, meaning to, like, bow or show respect to a superior, but not necessarily divine worship.
Exactly.
Why the different translation for the exact same word?
The video argues it's a theological necessity for the Watchtower because of what the rest of the Bible says about angels. The source points us to Colossians 2:18, which explicitly warns believers against the worship of angels.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the video notes that throughout the biblical texts, whenever a human tries to fall down and worship an angel, the angel immediately stops them in a panic and says, don't do that. Worship God alone.
Okay, looking at this, the gap here is profound. So if we connect these dots, the source is pointing out a massive paradox. You are commanded in Hebrews to do the exact thing to the Son that you are strictly forbidden from doing to an angel in Colossians.
Right.
If angels are absolutely forbidden from receiving worship, but the text commands all angels to worship the Son, then categorizing the Son as an angel creates a glaring, unresolvable textual contradiction. That's a massive knot to untangle.
It creates a huge theological knot.
Yeah.
And the source argues that you can only untangle it by looking at how the text structurally defines the Son versus how it defines angels.
Okay.
This brings us to the ultimate dividing line in this entire debate, the absolute boundary between the Creator and the created.
Let's get into the mechanics of that boundary. Because if Jesus isn't just a chief angel, according to these counter-arguments, what exactly is the structural difference between him and the angels in these ancient texts?
Well, the source does a really deep dive into the first chapter of Hebrews to answer this, because the author of Hebrews spends the entire chapter deliberately contrasting the nature of the Son with the nature of angels.
How so?
The video points out that angels are described merely as public servants or ministering spirits. They are described as being made of wind and a flame of fire. They are created things with a specific function.
And how does the text describe the Son in contrast?
Completely differently. The Son is called the heir of all things. He's described as the exact reflection of God's glory and the exact representation of his very being.
Wow.
But most strikingly, the source points out a verse in Hebrews, one where the Father is actually addressing the Son. The Father says, God is your throne forever and ever.
Wait, really? The Father is addressing the Son using the title God?
Yes. And the text goes on to say that the Son laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and that the heavens are the works of his hands.
So angels are the things that were made, and the Son is the one who made them.
Exactly. The source reinforces this structural difference by taking us to the Gospel of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word. The source emphasizes the mechanics of that specific word, was.
Meaning he already existed.
Exactly. The Word wasn't created in the beginning. The Word existed eternally. John says all things came into existence through him, and not even one thing came into existence without him.
But wait, the Watchtower teaches that Jesus had a beginning, right? That he was the literal first thing created by God.
Yes, they teach he is the firstborn of creation in a literal chronological sense, the first creature made before all other creatures.
Okay.
The source counters this by explaining the mechanics of John 1:14, where the Word became flesh. The video argues that Jesus had a beginning as a human.
Right, because he was conceived via the Holy Spirit.
Exactly, which the source notes from Luke 1:35. But his existence as the divine Word was eternal prior to that human incarnation.
Which brings us to what I think is the most jaw-dropping detail in this entire source. We talked about reading the fine print of a contract.
Oh, yes.
The source points out a specific editorial choice in the Watchtower's New World Translation from 1985 that literally alters the text on the page.
This is a fascinating moment of translation analysis. The source looks at Colossians 1:15 through 17. In traditional Greek manuscripts, this passage says that all things were created through the Son.
All things.
Things in heaven, things on earth, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him.
Which perfectly aligns with that creator category we just talked about.
Right. But the source highlights that the 1985 New World Translation inserts a word into this text, putting it in brackets. They translate it as, all other things were created through him.
They just added the word other. To change, created all things. To created all other things.
Yes. And the source points out that the word other does not exist anywhere in the original Greek text of that verse.
Wow, think about how much heavy lifting those two little brackets are doing.
It's massive.
You could ruin almost any book or contract in history by just inserting a single bracketed word where it doesn't belong.
Hmm.
So the source is saying the Watchtower puts Jesus inside the category of creation, like the first greatest masterpiece an artist ever painted.
Mm-hmm.
But the traditional texts put Jesus in the category of creator, the artist himself holding the brush. Inserting that word other is trying to force the artist onto the canvas.
That is a perfect analogy. The video is arguing that by inserting that bracketed word, they are taking Jesus out of the category of the eternal creator who made everything and forcing him into the category of a created thing who just helped make everything else.
Unbelievable.
It's a prime example of how an organization's underlying theology can dictate their translation choices, rather than the text dictating the theology.
So after all of this, I mean, we've gone deep into Greek translation mechanics, Hebrew plural nouns, territorial princes, and bracketed words. We've done the detective work.
We really have.
But why does the source dedicate so much time and energy to this distinction? What are the actual stakes for the people having this debate? Because to someone outside of this specific faith tradition, arguing over whether Jesus is the chief angel or the uncreated word might just sound like incredibly dense academic semantics.
The stakes, according to the source, couldn't be higher,
Mm-hmm.
because it ultimately comes down to the concept of honor and the requirements for salvation.
Okay.
The source brings up John 5, verses 22 and 23. This text states that the Father has entrusted all judgment to the Son, so that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father.
Just as they honor the Father, that implies total equal reverence.
Exactly. The verse continues, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. The video presenter argues that if you categorize Jesus as an angel, even the highest, most powerful archangel, he is still fundamentally a created being.
Right.
And in biblical terms, you cannot honor a creation just as you honor the Creator. Doing so is the literal definition of idolatry.
So by demoting his nature, you are inherently failing the command to honor him equally.
Precisely. And if you fail to honor the Son, the text says you fail to honor the Father. That ties directly into the source's final point regarding salvation.
What's that?
The video lists several verses, like John 20:31 and Acts 16:31, that explicitly tie a person's salvation to believing in the true identity of Jesus.
Oh, I see. Think about the relationships in your own life. If you interact with someone thinking they are a middle manager, but they are actually the founder of the company, your entire approach, respect level, and understanding of their authority is off.
Yeah, completely off.
The source is arguing that getting this identity wrong changes the entire religion. Believing he is a good man, a prophet, or an archangel is an entirely different reality than believing he is the eternal, uncreated Son of God.
That is the core of their argument. The identity of the Savior dictates the validity of the salvation.
Okay, let's zoom out and summarize this intellectual journey we've been on. We started with a logical deduction by the Watchtower. An archangel is a chief angel. There can logically only be one chief. And since Jesus descends with an archangel's voice, he must be that singular chief, Michael.
Right.
They even map him onto the angel of the abyss and tie him to the year 1914 based on their prophetic timelines.
But then we explored the source's textual counterarguments. We saw how the original Hebrew in Daniel describes Michael as one of the foremost princes, revealing a plurality and a cosmic hierarchy that challenges the singular chief idea. And we looked at the strict biblical prohibition against worshiping angels, juxtaposed against the explicit command for all angels to worship the Son.
And we saw how the text of Hebrews draws a massive, stark structural line between the created angels, who are just ministering spirits made of wind and fire, and the Creator Son, who laid the foundations of the earth.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We've really seen how two groups can look at the exact same ancient document, argue over the mechanics of a few specific words, and walk away with entirely different realities about the nature of the universe.
And, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on that detail about the New World Translation, inserting the word other into the book of Colossians.
Yeah.
We saw how inserting just one bracketed word can fundamentally alter the hierarchy of a religious text and change the nature of its main character. It makes you wonder, outside of theology, in the news you read, the articles you skim, or the media you consume every single day, where else are invisible brackets? Tiny editorial insertions, subtle framing choices, or slightly shifted definitions, completely changing the meaning of the original source without you even realizing it.
That is a phenomenal question. It all goes back to checking the fine print of the contract and always asking whose definition of reality you are signing on to. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We love untangling these complex, mysterious ideas with you. Keep questioning the text, keep reading closely, and always keep seeking the why behind the information you consume.